So, and then tomorrow, of course, is dedicated to Palestine. But let's just get through today right now. Thank you so much. Abed, it's yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Warren. Thank you guys again for joining us and for being with us this morning. This plenary session is titled Defining the Arab American Agenda, which is a very broad term and a very broad title. Apparently, there's going to be many issues that impact us all as Arab Americans, both domestically and foreign. But the key question and actually the common bond between all of these items is the fact that we need to organize, and we need to be organized in order to effectively address these issues. And without adequate organization within the community, there will not be adequate representation when it comes time for decision makers to move forward on these issues. So in order to prepare you and in order to empower you in moving forward on these issues and addressing these issues once you go back home, we've brought in who I think is one of the best organizers I've met, somebody that's played a key role in many of our issues, and somebody that's had experience with the Obama campaign, somebody that is currently, I believe, the director of data and targeting for the League of Conversation. You'll announce their title.
Conservation Voters.
Conservation Voters. And on top of that, Mo is a very good friend of mine, somebody that I met when I first moved here in D.C. We've done many projects together, and I'm very pleased that he can join us. But before we get into that, before I turn it over to Mo, just as a reminder that we do have a number of issues that we're working on. So right after this session, there will be a hate crimes hate crimes workshop, an immigration workshop, an education workshop, and a media workshop. And why these three issues? These are three issues we feel that we have been dealing with the most. And it's in these sessions, we hope you take what you learn here, what you hear from Mo, apply the information, and apply it to the information you receive from the speakers we have at our breakouts. So again, sorry for running over. Thank you for hanging with us. And I'll turn it over to Mo. We'll have statement, a few questions, then we'll open it up to questions from you guys as well.
So good morning. Thank you for coming into this session. I'm very pleased to be here. I am an immigrant. I came to this country at the age of 16. I graduated high school early and came to attend college at the University of Texas. Like most immigrants, I was not involved in politics for a long time. I got an undergraduate degree in computer science and math, and then a graduate degree in applied statistics. I used to work for the banking industry and do market research for big tech firms like Microsoft and T-Mobile were my biggest clients. And my job and my life took me to Chicago. And literally one weekend, I was sitting at home alone, and a guy called me and he said, we found your resume and we found papers and work you've done, and we'd like you to recruit you to the Obama campaign. You'll take a significant pay cut from what you were doing. I mean, it pays pretty well to work for Microsoft. They make a lot of money, so they can pay you a lot of money if you can tell them how to market their products. But I thought, this would be an opportunity to do something different and to engage in some movement that at the time was sweeping everybody up, right? Like the whole country was very excited in 2007, 2008 by Senator Obama, then Senator Obama, and how the prospect of change that he would bring to the political process. And being an immigrant, and his dad being an immigrant, I thought, this is great. This guy could be president. That means if that works, maybe my kid could be president. Like not me, but maybe my kid could be president. That meant a lot. And at the time, it was a pretty tough battle against Secretary Clinton. And I thought, I see a problem with the power structures, the political power structures in this country as they stand, whether they're Republican or Democrat. And here's somebody different, and so I want to work with them. I joined them. They thought, me being from Texas, the first place they would send me to was West Virginia. And they said, I said, my first name is Mohammed. That trumps me living in Texas. I don't know how they're going to feel about me in West Virginia, but I stayed with them, and I ended up working and being their data director in Nevada and Colorado through the general. And then since then, I caught the bug, right? Like I really can't go back to banking, although it's a much better financial situation, and I mean, you tell rich people what to do with their money. I mean, they love you and they treat you really well. And instead, I'm working for the labor unions or the environmental causes or pretty much everybody on the left side of the aisle. And I get told now that I'm a socialist and I'm ruining America. But the ability to impact people's lives meaningfully and try to change at the margins, because that's really, if you understand the American political process, change happens really gradually. And I didn't understand that till I came to Washington. But the ability to impact that kind of change made me stay here. And now I'm a Washingtonian, and I think I'm changing the world when I'm not, just like everybody else who lives in this town. But we try. My experience with the Arab American, as an Arab American, my experience is twofold. One, as an immigrant, but two, as trying to organize Arab Americans for the purposes of political participation. And two stories I'll tell, and then we can go to questions. The first was from actually last year's ADC convention. There was two sessions back to back. The first one was called Defining What It Means to Be an Arab American. It was actually in this same room, right? And it was full. Every seat, people were lined up against the walls. Everybody had an opinion about what it meant to be an Arab American, and everybody wanted to voice what they thought it meant to be an Arab American. The session right after that was working to define what it means to be an Arab American. Community organizing, how to define that through work in your community. And there were literally like 10 people left, right? Which I thought is emblematic of us as a community. And not only us, but a lot of people. We have a lot to say about what we think is wrong with the political process, how we are treated in America as immigrants or as Arab Americans, how we're labeled. But when it comes to engaging in the political process, very few people, and for reasons some I've figured out, some are beyond me, but don't take the next step into actually engaging with their neighbors, with organizations like ADC or AAI or all the other people out there. And the second story I'll tell is from this year, last year actually. There's a new freshman congressman that got, I should explain. I work for an environmental organization called the League of Conservation Voters. They're the second largest independent expenditure. That means that they have a super PAC, and they work on electing senators and congressmen, and it's now become the second largest super PAC in the country. So we played in 17 congressional and Senate races last year. We won 15 out of 17 races, where we were either the biggest player or the second biggest player on the race. So we garnered a lot of political process. One of those candidates that we became very close with is a freshman congressman from a western state, and I won't say more than that, but he's an African American, and he represents a district that's Hispanic and white, right? So he's not in a position where he's safe. He's always threatened. He's not in an African American district. He's always being challenged. And his district, he's a Democrat, but his district is an independent district. It swings both ways. But he won. We spend a lot of money. A lot of people spend a lot of money. The Democratic Party spent a lot of money to get him in place. And he came to Washington. And within a couple of weeks of coming to Washington, I don't know if you remember, Israel had bombed Syria for that first. They said, "Oh, there's a weapons shipment," and they bombed them. Well, our good friends at AIPAC send out a letter that they do all the time to all the members of Congress saying, sign this letter that pretty much says unequivocal support of Israel. I mean, if you live in Washington, D.C., you know that happens all the time. That's standard. It doesn't even bother me. I'm Palestinian, but it's so matter of fact that it doesn't bother me anymore. But the funny thing is that this person refused to sign the letter. They refused to sign the letter, and his chief of staff refused to sign the letter because a lot of Democrats at the time didn't know how they felt about engaging in Syria and that move would drag the U.S. into a war, but he wouldn't sign the letter. And they didn't take no. They kept calling him, and I'm talking to his chief of staff, and the calls went from 2 calls a day to him to 30 and 40 calls to his communication director, his chief of staff. They were calling 40 times a day. They were lighting up his phone all day for weeks. And he still said no. And they didn't take no for an answer. They went and looked, this is a true story, went and looked at his FEC reports. FEC reports are who gives you money during your election. And they had found this congressman came from a broken family. When he was younger, his family was broken up, and he had to stay with a friend from middle school. And that friend was Jewish. A Jewish American. And they found that person, that friend, had given a mass contribution. And they found out that that person's uncle was actually a big supporter of AIPAC. So they brought the uncle and the best friend to the congressman's office. How can you say no? How can you say no when your best friend comes, somebody who saved you as a child says, we need you to sign this letter? How do you say that? The moral of the story is that they didn't take no. He said no, 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 no 100 times, and they didn't take no. They stopped. They didn't stop. They didn't stop with his communication director. They didn't stop. They kept at it until they got what they wanted. And I feel that we don't have that kind of tenacity. We hear, oh, you're a problem. Okay, they hate us. Let's go home for the day. We're just discriminated against. Let's go home. And that doesn't work. If you're involved in American politics, whether you're an Arab American or Hispanic or African American or Jewish American or Irish American, the story of immigrants in this country is the same story. And you have to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it and be tenacious when you're confronted with rejection. And I think for some reason, we're not at that nexus. We're not at that point yet. And that, getting to that point, us understanding that we're gonna hear no, and we're gonna hear no constantly, but it won't matter. We're gonna keep at it. That's what's gonna take us from where we're at now to having a seat at the table.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you. So I know again, we only had, we had a half hour slated for this session. So what I'm gonna do is just go over real quick some of the things we were working on, get Mo's opinion, and then we're gonna call Ryan up here to do a recap on the Advocacy Day, and then we'll break out into our sessions. But if you, over the past year, there's so many things on the American agenda, so many things that are impacting us, from immigration reform, which we went over on the Graham amendments, as well as the House amendment, which includes racial profiling provisions. As mentioned earlier, these racial profiling provisions are taken from the DOJ guidance guidelines, which came in under the Bush administration, which ultimately would legalize racial profiling. And this is a big problem. Not only that, when it comes to immigration reform, there's the removal of the classification of the brother-sister category, but at the same time, they have increased the quota on, I believe, employment-based and H-1B-based visas. So in a way, that may help the community, and I know that our immigration session afterwards will touch on that as well. And there's also been a movement from some Arab Americans on the easing of investment visas and the easing of the opportunity for foreign investors to come here, get their green card, and so forth. So that's some of the things we're working on the immigration front. The hate crimes form, of course, the form I-699 was changed recently. This is a great victory for us. This took almost 3 years, and the Sikh community played a great lead in putting this together. The form was changed and adopted an anti-Arab box. We were on the form in the 90s. We were taken off the form in 1995. I don't know why we were taken off the form. It's a surprise to me. I found this out at the APB meeting, the advisory board meeting for the FBI a few weeks ago. But the reality is we're back on the form, and that's a big advantage to the community. This is going to be implemented in 2015. The reason is the fact that we need to train 17,000 law enforcement agencies across the country on how to look for the hate crimes. So it's not enough that the form exists and it says anti-Arab. They need to know what's anti-Arab mean, who are these Arabs, what is this community. So we need to get into these law enforcement agencies and move forward with this. Of course, another key issue impacting the community, something ADC takes very dearly, is education. And and I know that's, again, that's a broad term. Education is a big deal. And there are so many different aspects of education you look at, whether it comes to funding, curriculum, training. So there's a key conversation there that we need to have and we need to be involved in when it comes to immigration reform. And then the last thing is the final workshop is, of course, going to be dealing with media and portrayals. Although this is not a legislative or a policy item, the fact and the way we are portrayed in the media, the way we're portrayed publicly and by others, is something that we need to take seriously. And it's something that, through our communications department, through our outreach department, we will, turn to change. And it's something that also education plays a role in. So these are just some of the items we have. And the reality is this: if you were sitting in this seat 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, you would have heard the same items. And it seems that every year we're repeating ourselves. And I remember the conversation in 2009 when it came to immigration reform. I remember the conversation, as I mentioned in the session earlier, this 11 years ago when it came to Section 215 of the Patriot Act. I remember the conversations we have of racial profiling, the conversations we have of the bad legislation, the conversations we have of foreign policy. And it seems we keep having the same conversations. And I think Mo alluded to a great point where we're good at having these conversations, but what is going to push us over the edge is going to come when we take action on this. And when we sit together as a community and say, look, here's what we need to do, we have to get out and do it. And although we may disagree on some issues and our narratives may not always align, the reality is we are here and we could set a great example for Arabs across the world by what we do here and by what we accomplish here. So please keep that in mind as you get into these breakout sessions and go through the rest of the convention. But my question to Mo is we talked a lot about the lack of movement per se, but for our members here, what do they do? What could you do to when you go back home, go back to your communities and say, you know what, we need some work? Is it district visits? Is it office visits? Is it running for office? I mean, what are the possibilities? Is there something too big, too little? What do you think is the way to motivate these people to do something?
So my first question is actually, who here is a ADC dues paying member? Okay, great. So that's the first thing. It shocks me that dues are $50. I mean, I know times are tough. It's not like it used to be, but $50 is nothing. It really, when you think about it, broken over 12 months, that's less than $5. That's $3 I spend. And I hate to say it, but it's true. I spend $5 on a cup of coffee every single day. Every single day. Yeah, So, I mean, we're not even talking to lunch. It's not even 9 a.m. and I've spent $5, So $50. So for any organization to be functional, whether it's the president's campaign or an environmental organization or a Latino organization that pushes for immigration reform, or ADC that helps represent Arabs, if they don't have dues, and I'm not pushing, I'm not here to try to push you guys to pay dues to ADC, but whatever organization that you decide that you want to be a part of, supporting them financially enables them to do their work. If they don't have that, then it's impossible. I hear this all the time. So 5 years, I didn't know Abid, I didn't know ADC before 5 years ago, but there was a lot of controversy over the last couple of years. Oh, ADC does this, they don't represent me this and the other. And it was people, and my question was, are you a ADC member? Do you pay dues? No. Why don't you pay dues? Well, they don't represent me. Yeah, they don't represent you because you don't pay dues. Okay? If you do pay dues, if you do volunteer, then yes, you're a member of that organization and you get to say what they do. You get a say in what they do. But if you don't, then you don't get a say. And that happens on the political level at every junction. If you contribute to your mayoral race, or your congressman, or the president, then you have a stake. You have a stake in what they say and what they do. But if you don't, I mean, and this is funny because, we all know this. Nothing in America is free. Not raising our kids, not getting an education, not getting a better job, none of that is free. We come to this, you can come to this country and not do anything and collect welfare checks and have a miserable life, and you won't starve and you won't be, without a home. But if you want to make something of yourself, you're going to pay for an education, you're going to pay to train yourself for a better job, you're going to pay to raise your kids the right way, right? Everybody has kids. You pay when you can to put them in better schools. You move your house, pay more taxes so they have a better school district. So why is that we understand that concept in every part of our life except the political part of our life? We have to take that same concept and say, if we want our elected officials to represent us, it's not enough to be American citizens. It's not enough to be, just pay taxes and expect that they're going to be fair. They hear from people, hundreds of groups, every day. Lots of people lobby them. I want this, we want that, we want you to support this bill, support that bill. And the truth is, and here it is, and I'm sure you've heard this 100 times, elected officials, congressmen, senators, and the president, all politicians care about two things: voters and donors. And if you don't understand that simple fact, you don't understand American politics. So if you're not a voter, and we all vote, but we don't vote in a block. Who can say how many Arab Americans voted in any congressional day? Who can say? We have to be able to say, we brought this many votes to your race.
Do we have statistics?
We do.
We do?
Yeah, but those voters, they didn't vote because ADC, they voted because they were American citizens. They voted for President Obama or their congressman or whoever. They didn't vote because some organization said, you should vote and this is our list of issues, so vote. And then this is how it happens. You go out, you contact voters, you say, we want you to register to vote, and here are the issues that confront our community: racial discrimination, immigration, blah, 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 all of that. And then you get them to vote, and then you go back to that congressman or the mayor and you say, hey, that last race you ran in, you won by 10,000 votes. 5,000 of the 10,000 were our votes, or 3,000 of the 10,000 were our votes. So guess what? Either you stop attacking us, or next time you're going to have to face the other candidate on your own. And he's going to eat you up. And not literally you say that, but that's the implication. That's the implication. And we do that all the time in our lives, right? You do a good job because the understanding is, if not, your boss is going to have to hire somebody else who's going to do a worse job. Or you pay rent, you know what I'm saying? You buy a better house because, or you pay more for your kid's school because there's a transactional, there's something, you know what I'm saying? You're giving and you're receiving. But we don't apply that to politics. So for women or young people, when you go back to your community, have a house meeting. It's a concept, my friend Jamia in the back there, who's with NAACP, anybody who worked on the Obama campaign can tell you, it's very easy. Have a house meeting. You have parties all the time. Let's have a house meeting and say, we're going to come here today because we're going to talk about being members of X organization or working for X elected official, whatever you want. And organize people in your immediate circle. The change starts with you. You invite people and you organize them and you make them do something. And they'll, it's funny. You think that people won't do it, they'll do it. Me and Abid and Jamia and some other people, we, in 2011, started a charity because I'm Palestinian. I know they need money in Palestine. I get it. Like, believe me, I go home, I saw my family. My mom still lives there. I understand the situation there. But I live in Logan Circle. Homes in my neighborhood cost $1 million. Every time I come out my door, there's a guy eating out of my trash can. I can't turn my face without seeing that guy. So to me, homelessness was a problem in DC. And a lot of the Muslim charities, I'm Muslim, didn't address homelessness in my community. They wanted to send money to Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of places that needed, but they wouldn't talk about my community, what I face day to day. So I got together with Abid and we got some people in Jamia and we got some friends, and before you knew it, we had a charity. And everybody was like, oh, you're a Muslim charity, you're not going to get the paperwork. I swear to God, it was like 20 days. We applied for the charity, they gave us our C3 license in 20 days. It's not that hard. It's really not that difficult.
Well, before we, again, and I know we're running on time. I wanted to turn it over to Raed to give a quick couple-minute update.
Sure.
Mo will be, are you going to hang around here to take
Yeah,
some questions
and
afterwards?
we'll listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after Raed, then we'll.
Good morning, everyone. I met many of you on Thursday when we went to our annual advocacy day. And I just wanted to brief those who were not here on what happened very shortly. We will be sending a more detailed email with the main highlights of the day and our recommendations for following up. But I just want to mention briefly what happened. We started the day with a White House briefing. The White House briefing was, as many of you have heard, was underwhelming. I think many of our members were not happy with it. I heard from 2 or 3 different members who wanted to send a letter to the White House as a follow-up. If anyone is interested in drafting the letter or co-signing, speak to me today about it. After the White House meeting, we had congressional meetings, dozens of congressional meetings. I think around 150 members of ADC met with their representatives. And we focused on 4 different asks. The first was immigration. Immigration affects our community, especially when it comes to racial profiling or the blocking the ability of people to bring their siblings. These are the 2 main issues for the Arab community. The second issue is drones and surveillance, of course, especially in this week, the week where the NSA scandal broke. Everyone knows about it, so we try to focus on that as well. And the third issue was on Palestine. Palestine is still the issue for ADC and for many people in the Arab and Jewish community in the US. So we focused on that. The ADC is pushing for more accountability for where our tax money is being sent, because the US tax money, taxpayers' money is being sent to fund human rights abuses against Palestinians in Israel and in the occupied territory. Our last ask, and the most important to us, was about Alex Ode. We asked them all to have an update. I think many of us feel really emotional this week because Alex Ode's brother passed away with no closure. And we as community have the responsibility now to carry that flag, the flag of searching for a solution, searching for closure, and finding the murderers of Alex Ode. So we successfully managed to get a letter from a congresswoman to the FBI and the Attorney General to work on that. And I mean, these issues, of course, we will need to have a longer-term follow-up. As you might have noticed, there is a piece of paper on your chair, or you were handed it when you came through the door. And this is an invitation to your Congress member to contact the Attorney General and the FBI to ask for an update. At this moment, we're just asking for updates, and then we will try to increase the pressure. Once you sign the message, you can give it to Nurhan in the back, and we will make sure that it gets your Congress member. Congressional dinner was really successful this year. We had 9 congressional speakers. One of them was our keynote speaker, Congressman Keith Ellison. And the others were a diverse group of Congress members. Some of them actually came because ADC members met with them during the day and invited them. That was a really good sign that our membership is active enough to bring a Congress member to dinner the same day. I think one of the highlights of the evening was when Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee mentioned a similar case to Alex Ode in the African American community. A civil rights advocate called Medgar Evers was assassinated 50 years ago this week, and there was no closure either. So she said that she will work on the case of Alex Ode because she understands how painful that would be for communities and families. I think think overall, I mean, just to close, I would say it was a really successful advocacy day. But I want to reiterate what was said earlier on this panel. This is not a one-day task. You can't just meet with your congress member one day a year. We have to have a longer term follow-up mechanisms with congress members and the White House. I think you will be hearing from us in the upcoming weeks on very solid steps and asks that we will have, and we'll continue to put pressure on Congress for the upcoming year on these main 4 asks. I'll stop here. I hope we'll see you in the breakout sessions.
Thank you. We really have to get to the breakout sessions. I apologize. Mo is going to make himself available to answer any questions you guys may have afterwards, but we are running up against the clock. Like I said, we do have the 4 breakout sessions. These sessions on hate crimes will be in this room. And it's been said over and over, this is the start of the conversation. These are very key and core issues to ADC. Please make sure that you're on our email list, because through the year, you will be getting updates on different issues. Different things happen. We don't know what's going to be introduced in the next week or in the next month. So please, be prepared. Make sure you're on our email list. Attend the workshops. Immigration sessions in Lincoln 2. Education's in Lincoln 4. Media session is in Lincoln 3. And hate crimes is going to be in this session. The hate crime session is going to discuss the new changes to the hate crimes form and the work taken with that. Immigration session will discuss the immigration reform bill and, of course, the recent passage of the TPS extension and redesignation, which came yesterday. Will be discussed in that session as well. Thank you, guys. I apologize for running over, but please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Excuse me, if we can get everybody from the back of the room up front, we really want to get the hate crime session started and rolling. So sorry, we got to get the next session going, so if you want to answer questions outside. Excuse me, if we can have, we want to get the hate crime session going. I know this is a big room. There's many sessions going. So if we can have everybody move up to have a better feel for the session, a closer dialogue. If we can have everyone either move up for the hate crime session, so we can get this going.
about the form? Okay. It's for you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Hate Crimes Workshop. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alia El-Abadi. I'm a legal fellow with ADC. And I'd just like to say this is Rashad Steteya from the Council on American Islamic Relations. I hope I said that right. And Rajdeep Singh from the Sikh Coalition. We're delighted to have them here with us. I just wanted to say a quick note about the format. Since this is a workshop, we do want to encourage as much audience participation as possible. So I'm going to say some very quick remarks, and our speakers have prepared presentations for us today. And then after that, we're going to split up into two groups. We have some hypotheticals to discuss in those groups, and we encourage you to participate in those. And if there's time, we'll regroup in the end and discuss what we've learned today. I'd just like to start by saying that although many of us already intuitively know what a hate crime is, and we've undoubtedly heard about the instances that occur through the news, I think it's helpful for us to just start off with a general legal definition, which is defined federally as a hate crime being committed by anyone who, by force or by threat of force, injures, intimidates, or interferes with anyone on the basis of race, religion, color, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability. So I think just to have that defined is going to be helpful for us. I'd like to just, since we did start a little late, I'm going to skip over some of what I was planning to say, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Rashad Steteya. Rashad is a staff attorney at the national headquarters of the Council on American Islamic Relations. At CAIR, Rashad has worked with state and federal agencies to make changes at the policy level to reduce incidents of institutional religious discrimination. He regularly helps clients address hate crimes, patterns of bullying, employment discrimination, citizenship delays, and other civil rights cases. Rashad works directly with clients on an individual basis and also litigates constitutional issues such as warrantless surveillance and improper religious questioning of American citizens at U.S. borders. He studied English and political science at the University of Missouri-Columbia before attending law school at the University of Missouri School of Law, where he was an editor of the Journal of Dispute Resolution. I'll also introduce Rajdeep Singh, and then I'll invite Rashad to give his presentation. Rajdeep Singh joined the Sikh Coalition in December 2009 and serves as its Director of Law and Policy. As Director of Law and Policy, he focuses on developing and promoting policy solutions for civil rights issues through an interdisciplinary combination of government affairs, media relations, and interfaith coalition building. In this capacity, he has substantively engaged with the U.S. Congress, White House, and several federal agencies, including the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of State. He's led successful efforts to pass equal employment opportunity legislation in Oregon and California. He's published articles in the Washington Post and New York Times, appeared on numerous television and radio programs, and delivered dozens of presentations at government agencies, law schools, and universities. He earned his law degree in 2006 at the College of William and Mary and received his undergraduate degree in philosophy in 2003 at the University of Miami. So I'd like to thank them both for being here, and Rashad, you have the floor.
Okay. Are we queued up with the PowerPoint? Okay, yeah. So my name, again, is Rashad Steteya. I'm a staff attorney at CAIR, like Alia said. I don't know how many of you have heard of CAIR, but I'll just give you a little brief introduction to the kind of work we do. So CAIR is a national civil rights and advocacy organization. We have, if I can move over here, raise your hand if you don't see me, if I go out of your field of vision at any point, I'm sorry, and I'll try to stay still. At CAIR, we have 24 chapters nationwide. Now, as a national civil rights and advocacy organization, we're often like the first place people go to, members of the Muslim community, if they have a civil rights issue. So we are receiving hundreds of complaints almost on a weekly basis from people who are calling us, be it with employment issues, immigration issues, issues of citizenship delay, Or maybe they're having more governmental problems and they're being targeted by certain agencies or feel their rights are being aggrieved in some way, shape, or form. So what we do is we step in, we try to act as their defense, and we try to help these people. We provide free legal services and try to help these people in situations where they're being attacked or being harmed in some way. So at CAIR, we've recently been receiving, especially within the last year and a half, we've been seeing an uptick in complaints from people who are concerned that their community centers are going to be under attack. Now, this happened specifically after the Joplin incident of September 2012, where a Joplin mosque in Joplin, Missouri, a mosque was burned to the ground. Soon after that, there was an incident in Toledo, Ohio, where someone had broken into the mosque and set fire to the prayer area inside of the mosque. And so people are calling us, not saying that their mosque has necessarily been under attack, but they're wondering what they can do, how they can try to protect their community center. So in response to this, our people on our staff started reaching out to security experts, and we put together a best practices for community safety guide. And that's what I'm going to be covering today. So a bit about what I'll be discussing is I'll be talking about preliminary steps to safeguard your community. I'll be going just through then some general security tips and things that you might want to keep in mind as you return to your communities and start thinking about how you can best secure your institution. So these are just some examples. Again, I had mentioned the Joplin, Missouri incident in September 2012. Now, this mosque was burned to the ground, and there had been a previous arson attempt only weeks before, and they were concerned that the mosque was going to be attacked again, and lo and behold, less than a couple weeks later, the mosque was burned down. They have like a 10-second clip of the guy the suspect, a man running to the mosque at nighttime right before the fire, but the man, I think, to my understanding, is still at large. And so this is something, again, that kind of struck a lot of fear, and all of this, bear in mind, was soon after the horrible incidents in Oak Creek, which I know Rajdeep will be discussing more as well. Similarly, this is an image of the Toledo, Ohio mosque. This mosque, someone had broken into the prayer area and set fire. Now, it's scary, fortunately, I don't think anyone was harmed in either of these incidents, but again, we need to be aware of how we can safeguard any community institution, religious or otherwise, how to protect our borders, how to protect our property, in a sense. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So preliminary steps, how to safeguard your institution. I want to be clear up front. All of these are guidelines, but they're a starting point. The best thing you can do is consult with a security expert locally who knows your community, who knows your religious center, because these are the people who are going to be able to tell you how to safeguard your institution, because it cannot be a cookie-cutter solution. There's just no such thing to securing something with a cookie-cutter spot. So consider these preliminary steps, and then hopefully they'll give you a great starting point to go back home and try to start securing your community center. So the first thing you might want to do is consider developing a legal contact list. I say this because attorneys, despite the fact that a lot of people perceive us as pains in the neck, which we can be, we're also there to help you. And so when you know attorneys in your area, when you know people who can come to your rescue in the time of crisis, these are people who are very invaluable resources. And so ask them, reach out to volunteers in your area and ask them, can you come assist us in time of crisis? Can you help us out? And just make sure that they're there for you, because you never know who has expertise in what. Maybe one day you're going to need an accounting attorney or someone who's familiar with insurance claims, God forbid. And these are people then who can come to your rescue and help you out. You're also going to want to look into developing positive relationships with your local law enforcement agency. So what does that mean? Well, positive relationships with law enforcement, I think it just screensaver, sorry. Positive relationships with your law enforcement agencies, reaching out to the local cops, finding out who's on your beat, who's assigned to your area. Knowing these people, again, these are the first line of defense against crime. And so if knowing these people means that you can be better off and safer in the long run, then you should get to know them now. Next, I suggest holding a community forum, meeting with members of your community, talking about safety concerns they might be having. Because after you do that, again, you're going to be able to start putting together a list, something I'll discuss a little bit more momentarily. Next, you're going to want to start discussing building coalitions with other groups. Now, what does that mean? Well, coalition building is a very powerful tool. And it's a valuable tool because knowing interfaith communities, working with people who are of different mindset than yours, of different communities, these are the groups that come to your aid. For example, in Joplin, Missouri, after the mosque was burned down, it was during the month of Ramadan, so people were fasting, and they didn't have anywhere to break fast. So the local community got together and found these people a spot, and the churches pitched in, and everyone pitched in so they could go have their Ramadan iftar together as a community. So after that, they were, fortunately set, but it was a lot, again, because of the community relationships they had built. So I think we temporarily, have I done something wrong? Yeah, I do, somewhere. No, you're fine, no worries. Okay, so the next thing that I'll be going over is, just talking about then establishing a community support network. So understand who these people are, having them on your radar again, and just building connections within your community and outside of it. So the next slide, which hopefully will be shown in a few minutes, just talks about moving toward community preparedness, what you can do. So there are really 4 steps to this, and they are all, again, things that if you do now up front, if anything ever happened inside of your community or inside of your community centers, there are things that are going to prepare you to respond and help mitigate those crises as best as you can. And I know Rajdeep will be going over a little bit about how to respond as well, and I think he has some really valuable things to say there. So mainly, the first thing you can do is be aware. The next thing is assessing your vulnerability. Finally, you want to prepare, plan, and prevent. And so that's kind of 2 steps in one. But preparing and planning, if you are well prepared, if anything ever happened, this is going to help you better mitigate the crisis and better weather the storm you're in. So what does being aware actually entail? Well, being aware, I think I'm disconnected from this, but that's fine. Being aware really means that you're going to have a security awareness program. So a security awareness program, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to have members of your community who are interested in security issues and issues relating to your community. I put it over there. Issues relating to your community. And these are people who have just a generalized idea of security that they want to participate. Then you're going to talk about issues that they think are relevant. How can they protect your community? And what can they do to assist? And so after you've done that, I'll just get back to where I was, I'm sorry. Yeah, and after you've done this, then you're going to want to just talk about, well, has anyone seen any suspicious activity lately? This is part of awareness, knowing what's happening in the news. Being aware, well, are there other communities being targeted somewhere? Are other communities like ours are under some sort of maybe scrutiny by some politician who's trying to call out immigrant communities generally, and then maybe you're seeing an increase in hateful incidents, maybe people are receiving an uptick of hate mail? And these are things that this sort of awareness, having it, is going to help you safeguard in the long run. So the next thing you're going to want to do, and this is an important aspect, is assessing your vulnerability. Now, what does this require? Well, it requires a few things, and a few things that I think you can get started on right away, which is, first of all, asking what security measures are currently in place inside of your institution. So this means look at your security hardware. Look at what procedures you have in place if there's ever an incident that happens. How are you going to handle it if you're inside the mosque and a fire starts? Or if you're inside a church and someone starts coming by and paintballing? This happened last year. People were at congregating for a nighttime prayer during Ramadan, and someone came by, they started hearing what sounded like gunshots, and they went outside and they saw someone paintballing, but was that the right thing to do? And you need to ask, well, what are we going to do in these incidents? How are we going to help? And how are we going to protect each other? So after you've examined your current security measures, ask what risks we face in our environment. Now this could be any number of things. It could be burglary, graffiti, theft, arson, or something even worse like a shooting. So then ask what gaps we have in our security. After you've assessed what's in place, compare the list you've developed about the risks you have and compare that to what procedures you have in place and see how you can try to answer any questions you might have. Well, what will we do if X happens? And after you've done that, ask what gaps you have. Are your doors locked? Are you leaving your center open 24 hours a day? And a lot of people do that actually, and it's quite surprising, but again, people just leave their doors open, but maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Do you have a security alarm? Are people using it? Do you have lights on outside at night so it can deter any potential vandals? These are questions that you want to ask, again, because they should be able to help you in the long haul. Finally, an important question you want to ask is, what can we do given our resources? So our resources, as they are, well, everyone has a limited budget. Everyone has a limited pool to pull from. And so when you're pulling from this pool, you need to ask, you need to prioritize. Well, do we need a security system? Or do we want to just have a security committee that can help deal with these things? And so I'll talk a little bit more about resources and how to kind of come across them if you find you don't have the funds necessary. I'll touch on that momentarily. And how am I doing on time, Alia? Okay, great. Yeah, so then I'll just talk about, I'm going to kind of skip through a few of these things, and we'll talk about them more in the breakout session as well. So if you have questions at that point, we'll go through it as well. So preparing and planning, and what does that actually mean? Well, there are three elements to being prepared, and this is what we've talked to security experts and how we've interpreted it. But three elements to preparing and planning. That's getting people on board, understanding your procedures and security-related protocol, and then finally, understanding what security equipment and hardware you have in place. So getting people involved is actually a pretty simple thing to do, but develop a security committee. If you have a community center, well, there's probably a board of some sort, and maybe members of that board have a security background. So appoint a head of the security committee, and make this person someone who has a background in security, and someone who can help if there is a crisis, someone who knows how to deal with these issues. And also, maybe consider the use of security ushers. People who can stand outside during a congregation, during an event, who can occasionally walk around the property and make sure that there's nothing suspicious, no people are entering that are carrying big bags and leaving them behind. It's amazing what two people at a front door or a back door can do to deter someone from entering and trying to cause any harm. So I'm going to kind of skip through a few of these things, but consider purchasing security hardware and equipment. Now, do you have barriers? Do you have alarms, cameras, lighting? All of these things together can help deter a criminal from trying to commit any harm on your institution. Now finally, develop a safety plan. This safety plan should lay out an answer to all of these concerns you have, what you need to do in a case of a crisis. And this safety plan is something you're going to have on staff. You're going to present it to everyone in your community, including the security committee, and you're going to tell them, here's what we do in the event of X, Y, or Z crisis. Then finally, you're going to want to develop a response plan. Now this response plan is important because it makes you ask the questions that are saying, what do we need if anything ever happened? If our mosque gets burned down, what can we do to recover quickly? Well, do we have our documents stored in a safe place, or are they in the building itself? What about our security camera footage? Is that stored in the building? Because if anyone attacked the building, the security footage would go with it. So consider storing these important documents, maybe getting cameras that can transmit wirelessly and store footage in the cloud, because this would again help you find footage in case anything ever happened. But similarly, you want to do this with all of your important documents. You're going to have meeting minutes that are stored electronically. You're going to have board bylaws. You're going to have maybe even payrolls. And if anything ever happened to the computer system inside the building, you're going to have to start from scratch again. So one thing I suggest doing is getting an external hard drive, backing these things up, and then keeping it in a safe off-site. So other than that, then I just will touch kind of briefly final point, which is just about prevention. Now all of these things together are not going to prevent any crime from happening, and that's the sad reality. But again, what they can do is make you more ready in the situation that something does happen. Additionally, what it can do is this preparation makes you ready to respond and mitigate to a crime should anything ever happen. You're going to be ready to jump and try to, resolve the problem. You're not even going to hesitate. And you're going to know exactly what protocols you need to do. Now finally, this is not a shameless plug, I promise, but we do have a safety brochure that CAIR has put together. It is a community safety guide. If you're interested in finding it, they're available for free online at CAIR's website. And all you have to do is just request them, and then you'll get quick access to it. So please, if you do want more information, we can have more question and response in the breakout session. I'm going to hand it over now to Rajdeep, who I think will talk about more individual response. That's the clicker. Do you need a clicker?
I'm good. Yeah, thanks. All right. Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody's doing all right. I want to start by thanking ADC for having me here. ADC is one of the strongest allies that we work with at the Sikh Coalition, so it's really a privilege and a pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to talk about individual and organizational responses to hate crimes. I hope that the lessons that we've learned can be applicable to all of the work that you do, both at the grassroots level and the organizational level. I'm going to fly through these slides in the interest of time, but at the end of this presentation, you'll find my contact information, and I'd love to be in touch with you if you have additional questions or comments. I want to give you some context for the attack on the Oak Creek Gurdwara, or House of Worship, last year in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. One of the points that was lost on the media, but which we've been struggling to make, is that this attack on our house of worship was the most lethal attack on an American place of worship since the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, which was a turning point in the civil rights movement, which really galvanized support for the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. The point here is that we have to contextualize the post 9/11 experiences of our communities. We have to connect them to the American experience so that we're more relatable and so that we can build coalitions with communities that don't necessarily know very much about ours. I also want to give you some context about Sikh Americans. There's this misconception that Sikhs have only experienced violence in the post 9/11 environment, and there's a further misconception that Sikhs are only targeted because of anti-Muslim or anti-Arab bias. That's not the case. That's certainly not always the case in the post 9/11 environment. In fact, Sikhs have been in this country since the late 1890s, and the first documented instance or incident of violence directed at Sikhs occurred in Bellingham, Washington, near Seattle in 1907. A group of Sikh migrant workers was attacked by a mob and literally driven out of town at the height of the nativist movement in this country at a time when the Ku Klux Klan, among other organizations, had a lot of clout. So I am aware of the American Arab experience, and I know that the American Arab community has experienced hate crime, discrimination long before 9/11, but it's important to realize that our communities, which have so much shared experience, have been struggling for a long, long time. These aren't new problems, in other words. We've conducted some surveys in recent years and have found that large percentages, disproportionately large percentages of Sikhs have experienced hate crime and discrimination and school bullying in the post 9/11 environment. We conducted surveys in New York City and San Francisco in the last several years and found that upwards of 9 or 10% of our respondents have experienced either physical violence or property damage because of their religion. Now that means that Sikhs are potentially hundreds of times more likely than their fellow Americans to experience hate crime. The lesson here is that it's very important to collect data and to collect statistics. It's very important for us in community organizations to do this because we can't always count on government to do it. And in fact, as ADC can attest, both of our organizations worked very hard over the course of the last couple of years to persuade finally the FBI to begin tracking hate crimes formally against our communities. But we've been doing this long before the FBI agreed to do so. So it's very important to plug in these data gaps because this helps us make the case that there's a problem. After Oak Creek, very important at an organizational level to bring this to the highest levels of government, bring attention to these issues to the highest levels of government. After Oak Creek, we organized a Senate hearing on hate crime and the threat of domestic extremism. And I'm proud to say that we received support from over 150 organizations in the cause of holding this hearing. And the idea was not to focus merely on violence against Sikhs. The idea was to focus on the problem of hate crime generally against people based on religion, sexual orientation, sex, race, etc. And the idea also was to highlight attention with respect to the proliferation of domestic extremist groups in this country. It may not be apparent to most Americans that most terrorist activity in this country in the last 10 years has been perpetrated by domestic extremist groups. It's a point that we wanted to put on the national radar. The point is that we try to make the best of a very, very bad situation, and we try to create awareness. In fact, the gentleman that you see photographed there, Harpreet Singh Sani, is from Oak Creek, Wisconsin. His mother was shot and killed at the Gurdwara, and he had enough courage just over a month after this happened to testify in front of the Senate to share his story and plead for a more robust response vis-a-vis hate crime and domestic extremism. We received support from many organizations, including ADC, and the important lesson here is that it's very, very important to build coalitions. This is a point that was made earlier. There's strength in numbers, and you need to work with as many organizations and stakeholders and affected communities as possible. Otherwise, frankly speaking, nothing will get done. I want to very quickly give you now a sense of the kinds of responses that can be undertaken in the context of hate crime at the grassroots level, at the individual level. It's one thing for organizations like the Sikh Coalition to organize hearings in the Senate or CAIR or ADC to advocate in Congress for modifications to hate crime laws or advocate with the FBI to start collecting statistics against our communities. But the question is, what can we as individuals do in our communities, regardless of where we live? Well, I'll tell you what the Sikh community in Fresno, California did last month. Mr. Pyara Singh, who's a photograph there is 81 years old. He was beaten with a steel rod in early May 2013, just last month, just about a month ago. Suffered a punctured lung, facial fracture, and several broken ribs, but thankfully he survived. And in response to this, the community organically, with the help of the Sikh Coalition, but organically on its own volition, undertook a 3-tiered response to this crisis, which consisted of government engagement, media engagement, and community engagement. This is a very helpful way of thinking about a response to hate crime, or any kind of crisis, regardless of what it is. Government engagement consisted of outreach to federal and local law enforcement agencies. I'm not sure if you guys have worked with the Community Relations Service of the U.S. Department of Justice, CRS. Please do visit their website. They are an untapped and I think a treasure of a resource housed within the Department of Justice. Their job is to conciliate and mediate community tensions anywhere in the country proactively to avoid tensions based on race and religion and this sort of thing. And very few people know that they exist, but they're considered the federal government's peacemakers. They're there to calm community tensions and provide resources to communities that have experienced hate crime. It's very important to get to know CRS. They're very good friends of ours. We also interacted with members of Congress, and as you'll see in subsequent slides, we did get some traction in Congress in terms of creating awareness about this particular incident. Media engagement. We notified as many media outlets as possible about what happened because awareness is so important. It's important for hate crime and frankly all crime not to be taken for granted. You know, we may have become a society or maybe becoming a society where we're so used to violence that it's second nature, and after the 15-minute news cycle we forget about it and we move on to the next crime. But it's very important for these stories to be told as widely as possible through the media. So by all means, call the media. You don't have to be affiliated with an organization. If something like this happens in your community in a small town, call the Associated Press. Get it some national attention. Write an op-ed for the local paper and explain why this is a problem, not just for your community, but for communities at large. Community engagement is very important. As you'll see in subsequent slides very quickly, we undertook an effort to present information about Sikh culture and Sikh traditions in the public schools to inoculate children against ignorance of the sort that could manifest itself later on as discrimination and violence. In fact, the community there as well organically organized a town hall meeting where they brought together the local sheriff, U.S. Attorney's Office, interfaith leaders and so forth to express solidarity with Mr. Pyara Singh and his family. I told you about congressional outreach. David Valadeo, who's a congressman from the Fresno area, issued a statement condemning the attack on Mr. Pyara Singh. So it gave an incident at the local level national attention, and it's on the public record now. This is taken from his website. And he happens to be a Republican. Judy Chu, congresswoman from Southern California, who's the head of a Congressional American Sikh Caucus, also issued a condemnation of the attack on Mr. Pyara Singh. She is a Democrat, so it's very important to engage with lawmakers on a bipartisan basis and ask them to issue condemnation statements, because then it makes it more difficult for politicians to start stereotyping our communities, which I'm afraid they are in the habit of doing from time to time. If you have this on the record, that politicians are speaking out against hate crimes against Arabs, Sikhs, Muslims, South Asians, makes it more difficult for other politicians to then start making inflammatory and xenophobic statements against our communities, because then you could point to this and say, well, you know, by this benchmark, this is unacceptable. One of our colleagues at the Sikh Coalition, Simran Kaur, authored an op-ed in the Fresno Bee shortly after the attack, and it's very important for our communities to make the best of bad situations and use them as educational opportunities and learning opportunities for the broader community. Op-eds, letters to the editor, imperative after a community crisis like a hate crime. We issued a press release praising the police department for their swift arrest and response generally to this hate crime. They arrested the assailant. He has actually since been charged with a hate crime, which will ensure that he stays in jail for longer than he otherwise would have. But we want to give credit where credit is due. That's very important. When a lawmaker or a government agency does something good, give them praise publicly, because that incentivizes good behavior on their part in the future. These are photos of the town hall meeting. As you can see, it was very well attended, and the local community met with the local sheriff, and he committed himself to working with the community proactively to address their concerns and to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again in Fresno, California. And I told you about our outreach with schools. Simran Kaur, the colleague of ours who authored the op-ed, has now been going into the public schools of Fresno, California proactively to create awareness about Sikhs. Who are Sikhs? Why do we wear turbans? Where are we from? Etc. And the idea here is to inoculate or immunize children against bigotry of the sort that could manifest itself as violence and discrimination later in life. And I should tell you that we do this anyway as a matter of our organizational mandate. We go around the country to public schools and have diversity presentations, and we do presentations on an interfaith basis, again, to inoculate people against ignorance and bigotry in the hope that we will not have to deal with hate crime. So you can do this in the context of a hate crime, but it's very important to be proactive and to educate people, because education is the best cure for ignorance and bigotry. My contact information is here. Feel free to send me an email or just visit our website at sikhcoalition.org. Again, I'm very thankful to ADC for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad and Rajdeep, for two very good presentations. At this point, I'd like to invite the audience members to split up into two groups, and we're going to have each of our speakers lead a group discussion. We have hypotheticals here that we're going to hand out to everyone. Maybe the best way to do this is if maybe from this side of the room on, we can come to that side and towards the front, and we can even move the chairs around so that it's more of a discussion. And from there to there, we can also do the same, and if you'd each like to take a group. And we have, I should mention that because of the late start, we're going to be ending at about 12:15, which still gives us good time to make it to the lunch at 12:30. So we're going to have our group discussion for about half an hour, and if there's time, we'll regroup at the end to discuss what we've talked about. Thank you.